Hi everyone, I'm Patrick Arlt. I'm going to talk today about customizing base maps in your applications. We're going to go over a ton of neat tools and some code examples about how to spice up your base maps a little bit. Before we get started, I wanted to just kind of do a general refresher on how the base maps are structured and why they're structured the way they are. So the base maps are done as vector tiles, which compresses all the geographic data, and that gets sent over the wire in a tile scheme. And it allows us to transfer and render lots and lots of stuff very, very quickly. And the styling rules become separate from the data that's in the tiles. And this lets you write lots and lots of different styles on top of one tile set, which is what we're going to do in this talk. We're going to write custom styles on top of the tiles from the Basemap service. So the styling follows the Mapbox GL style specification. The Esri styles are rather complex. They have, on average, probably about 150 to 300 layers a piece. The reason for that is the data is very, very granular and allows for lots and lots of styling. Each layer maps in that style maps to a source in the vector tiles and is usually filtered by some option. And primarily we use fill symbol and line layers. This is kind of tricky to write by hand, which is why we are here to talk about Vector Tile Style Editor. And we wrote this as a tool for editing the base maps, and the goal is to have kind of a total editing experience online, so that you can just author these custom styles whenever you want and tweak them for your application. So new this year, there's OSM Daylight and OpenStreetMap Blueprint styles. Those are either in the editor or they're coming soon. There's also a huge new set of POI data in the base maps, and we'll play around with that a little bit in some of the demos. So those are opt-in layers, so you actually have to choose to reveal them in your map. And then we'll talk about the new developer specific styles, which use the new styles API. So just to show you kind of a taste of what can be done, we have a little showcase story map. These are some maps that I've made over the years using this tool. You can see it's, I like a lot of color and a lot of contrast. These are all based on different pre-existing styles. So you can see there's San Francisco, London. Monochrome styles are also quite easy to make if you're looking for a really particular thematic experience. It's kind of high contrast. Again, another kind of high contrast black and white style, a modification of some of the modern antique, another monochrome, and then a variation on the mid-century style. So you can see it's easy to create a lot of really interesting and colorful styles with this, and you can use that cartographically in a lot of ways. So let's get started. There are two ways to access Vector Tile Style Editor, and one is in ArcGIS Online or Enterprise when you add a vector tile layer into the map viewer. This is only in the 3x older map viewer. It's not in the new map viewer yet. But once you add it there, you'll see this change style icon. We are going to use the ArcGIS for Developers website. In your dashboard, there's a Layers tab, and under Layers, there's a new vector basemap layer style. So we are going to create a new vector basemap style. We're going to get started. I'm going to go, my preferences is usually for these kinds of demos, I like to do the light or dark canvas. You'll see I'm signed in with a developer account, so I get the for developers version of all of these styles. The difference here is this uses the new Basemaps API, so this requires an API key to consume this style. So we'll get into how you set that up at the end of my presentation. So this is essentially the default look at the editor now that we have that set up. So the first tool I want to look at is I want to look at Quick Editor, and that's a really fast bulk styler. So you essentially pick 6 different colors, and it executes a whole sequence of styling rules and gives you kind of really brute force control over those hundreds and hundreds of layers. So let's take a quick look at how it works. The funnest way is to just hit randomize and see what happens. And this is where a lot of those really colorful styles come from. This one's kind of interesting. We'll go here. So each of the 6 main color groupings, land, water, roads, boundaries, buildings, and nature, map onto some set of layers or some, they map onto some subset of layers. And there are also other controls. So you can recolor icons and patterns. You can define label coloring. Those are all different tools. And then we also give you in these color pickers different tools for selecting hues and shades. I don't necessarily like that. Let's actually maybe we'll go dark on boundaries. We'll do tan boundaries. Roads. So you can see I've got the maximum label contrast. This is actually a nice tool for determining. You can see the difference between low and maximum there as I change the actual color that I'm looking at. So this determines how much contrast the halos have with the actual text. So usually what we do is we take the text color and we actually darken the text or lighten the text. So we make the opposite adjustment to the halo until it reaches a certain threshold. And then once it crosses that threshold, we save it. Playing around, I kind of like how this is looking. We're just going to leave this. So we're going to leave this here and take a look at how this actually works internally. So whenever one of those 6 color groups gets modified, we run all of the styling rules, and then labels get recolored to meet that contrast threshold. So depending on the contrast threshold, you have, low, medium, high, and maximum. We'll make the text and the halos lighter or darker until we cross that threshold. And then we usually also do the same things for layers that we know represent things like road casings and shadows on buildings. So if I zoom in this little area of Sydney, you can see there's a shadow around the building that gets a darker color, and then there's a casing and an outline around the road that also gets a slightly darker color. So we make lots and lots of little adjustments like that based on those rules. And then finally, if you actually save your layer, which I'm going to do now, so I'm going to save that. I'm going to share it with everyone. If you save it, we also unlock another option, which is to actually tint the icons and patterns to match these other colors. So once this gets done saving, I'll demonstrate that. So now we've got our layer saved, and I know a good place to look at this effect, which is down here in Long Beach. So you can see, even though we've recolored everything, there's still some areas that didn't pick up our colors. And the reason for this is those aren't actually colors, those are images. And the easiest way is we're going to just tweak this just a little. And now you can see that actually picked up some different colors. So that picked up part of the land color inside this ecological reserve. And the roads also picked up a little bit of that color. So let's make another little tweak. And you can see that the road shield there changed. So this is a good way to also make a lot of this match if you have a lot of images in your layers. There's not as many since this is one of the canvas styles. So you can see that picks up water for the color of the marshland here around the aquatic park. So that's Quick Editor. So I want to look next at Group Editor. And we've done a lot of work to make it easy to edit large groups of layers in bulk. And a good way to show this is actually to show you how I like to edit road networks with the Group Editor. So we have an entire category called roads. And this uses the same set of styling rules that Quick Editor uses. So if I want to change the color of everything inside this roads, all 65 layers, I can just assign a new color to every road. But if I wanted to, say, make highways look a little darker, I can assign just a color to highways. And then I could potentially go through and maybe I'll copy this, and let's assign the same color to freeways. And then maybe major roads are slightly darker. And then we can make minor roads slightly lighter. And now you can see that I actually started to kind of gradually drop down those different road layers. So let's make minor roads even lighter. Service roads, those can be even lighter than that. So this is a really good way you can kind of drill down into very specific groups of layers and actually edit them all at once. This is also good for things like layers, so like labels. So if we have this Westminster label, we can click on it. If I click on it, that'll give me the small, and I could probably make this black. Let's pick label colors for it. Label text is going to be black, halo is going to be white, instead of, we'll make it bold. And you can go through and you can kind of grab groups of layers and make similar adjustments to them as you go through. So this is our kind of in progress style with the Group Editor. So this lets you just kind of apply the Quick Editor rules, but in a slightly more selective way across a large number of the categories that we've defined. And for the ArcGIS and the OSM Basemaps, there's a lot of categories that we've predefined. We've done a lot of work categorizing all those layers into logical groupings so that you can use the Group Editor really efficiently. So next we have the Layer Editor. So this allows for that kind of super detailed editing of a single layer. And this is really great for things that you want really fine-grained control over. So, this road local 0, those are just too bold, so let's really fade them. So we can go in and actually edit a lot of the detailed properties of a lot of these layers individually. And this gets really powerful in terms of needing to make those really specific edits. So we can do things like add dashes. So that gives you some clues as to how this would operate. You can make very, very particular adjustments. Maybe we want to make this label for parks and farms a little bigger, so we can increase its size. That's a little too big. So you can actually go in, and a lot of the properties that you can edit in Vector Tile Style Editor can use either a single value or a value by zoom level, so you can actually vary the size of this depending on zoom level. So currently I'm at zoom 14. Maybe this should be 10, but as we zoom out, so we can make this. So there's also the ability to adjust the visible zoom range. So if I want this to be visible out to zoom 10, I can. And it'll also sometimes be hidden based on other collisions with other labels. So there's probably a lot of other street labels and stuff here it thinks it might be colliding with. So the layout engine for labels is a little unpredictable. We try to keep a really sane amount of label points on the screen at any given time. So these settings aren't exact in terms of labels. They do get really exact in terms of editing things like I want roads to be visible here or not. But for labels, the labels also might have the be subject to the layer collisions. So chances are that's colliding with some other labels that it thinks are being displayed there. So there's a lot of road labels. So that's the detailed layer editor. And one of my favorites that we let you do, we released this a few years ago, is sprite editing. So we have this lovely neon green park or farming layer, and I have a pattern that I want to use for that. So you can actually upload a pattern. Just call this green space, and we'll upload it. And then that actually uploads it into the patterns palette, and then we'll say water. I have a slightly different pattern, but for blue. And now that those are uploaded, we can actually select them from the pattern palette and use them for patterns. So I can actually say, maybe I also want this marine area to be that water. Make that 50%. That looks good. Let's make this 50% as well. So you can see that the parks started to get a bit of a different look. We can do the same thing for these admin areas. So you can start to get a really custom kind of textured look. This has been taken really far in maps like the watercolor layer, where almost everything has been painted with a watercolor brush. Lots and lots of custom textures and patterns inside there. You can also do the same thing with editing icons. So these are the two road labels. So if we look in around Highway 1 here, you can see that that's where those are. And you can actually also tint these depending on what color you want. So we actually give you the ability to just apply kind of a quick color tint to those. So we can tint both of those. So you can see that we got a little bit more of that pink color in there. We can apply that a little stronger. There we go. And later you can go in and you can also edit the text. So we probably don't want that to be there. You can also edit textures. So let's maybe make this sand a little more yellow. Kind of gets another look. So this lets you really edit in kind of great amounts of detail the images that your map uses, things like road sprites and things like that. And we actually group similarly named layers. So you can also upload and replace individual icons. So if we wanted to say download this road shield that gets displayed at this particular width for roads, you could actually download it, edit it, and then re-upload it again and do that individually for all of those. So I want to look at the color editor next. So when you're editing colors, this is a great way to identify things that might not have been picked up or colored correctly by the quick editor. So we can kind of take a peek at all of the colors that are used across our entire map. And we can identify colors that feel out of place and identify where they are. So these are some of the boundary lines, which maybe aren't the best now in this brown. So we can do things like replace all instances of this color with another color. Let's do purple. And then that actually replaces all the instances of that color. So this is a good tool for auditing. But it's also a good tool for making these kinds of bulk adjustments. If you feel like you've got a color that feels out of place and you don't necessarily know what layer it's coming from and you want to just look at that by layer, you can also click the names of these to go to that layer. So once you've got your custom style, let's save this. We want to go in and we want to actually use that inside our application. I'm going to show two examples, one with the JavaScript API and one with Mapbox GLJS. So in the JavaScript API, you're going to want to use the vector tile layer and basemap classes. And you can just do this by item ID. So the item ID is what appears in the URL bar of the vector tile style editor, but it also appears in the developer dashboard for you to use. So this is a style that I was working on earlier. I can take this item ID and provide it to the JavaScript API's vector tile layer class. So this will create an instance of that vector tile layer, and since we want the map to treat that like a base map, you can create a new instance of the base map. That vector tile layer is one of our base layers, and then you can create your map based on that. Now this is an example of that in action. So we'll grab our item ID. And then we have our vector base map that's in a custom application ready for us to use. Lots of interesting cartography choices here in this one. So that's how you can use that in the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. You can swap these around. Take a look at the other style I made. This one's predominantly got that green and blue with those same textures. And you can see I can get some really nice effects and some interesting data visualizations and things like that. The other features that I think most commonly are used is actually turning off things in maps. So I do want to go back and talk about how you would just turn off an existing feature from a style. So we're going to go back to, let's go back to our world navigation. So we'll start again. So this is a really common use case when using the style editor. And depending on the data that you're displaying in your application, you might want to hide or show things in the map. So, for example, in this navigation, maybe you want to use this, but you want to provide your own natural areas. You've got your own forests that you're working with. It's actually pretty easy. You can select the entire group and you can just turn off all of the forests. And then we could identify where some other layers that are using this green. So there's some cemeteries, some open space, some park and farming, some vegetation. So we can turn off those vegetation layers. Looks like there's park or farming. We're going to leave that. So now I essentially have that same map, but without any of those major forests or vegetation layers, and it's ready for me to bring my data in on top of that and actually start doing the editing. So this is important because a lot of times what I do is I'll simply tweak maybe a few colors, I'll make the labels a different color, and then I'll continue on and use that as a base for some other data. So I want to take a look at Mapbox GLJS now. This uses the Basemap Styles API, which we just released directly. So you can see we have a new Mapbox GL map. We're going to give it the Styles API endpoint, so REST services styles, and then we have our Basemap enum and our API key. This is actually just that item ID. So normally you would see something like ArcGIS Streets here, but we don't use ArcGIS Streets. Instead, we just use the item ID of our custom base map. So that's this one that I made earlier. Let's take a look at our new custom layer. And now we can see we have our new custom layer here ready for us to use. So this is one way that you can bring them in if you're using Mapbox GLJS as a custom application. So you just need an API key, a Basemap enum, which is your item ID, and you pass that in as the base style of your map. So if you want to get started, we have 2 tutorials. These will be in the links in the PDF of the PowerPoint. Create a custom basemap style and display a custom basemap style. These are both on the developer website in the Mapping APIs and Location Services guides. You can go here, and then they're going to be in Maps, Tutorials, Display Custom Basemap Style. And then you can also find which APIs that's for. And clicking through, you can also find the Create a Custom Basemap Style in the Visualization chapter. We also have a GeoNet community that you can leave us feedback on the editor and the editing experience on. We check that pretty regularly, and we're constantly trying to make improvements to the process. That's all.